Has anyone else gone through an addiction to DoorDash and Grubhub? My husband and I went through a phase where we were extremely busy and found ourselves using a delivery service a few times a week. This particular week, I think this was our third time ordering. We just got done with work and it was already 7 p.m. and we just didn't feel like cooking. We usually have good experiences with delivery services. Once in a while, we'll get a crap delivery person who just kind of throws the food around or the occasional canceled order. But on this particular night, my husband and I chose to splurge. We each ordered 3 courses from a pretty pricey restaurant, but also knew that we'd have leftovers for at least a few days. In the hopes that the food would arrive quickly and safely, we put a very large tip on the order. The delivery person, Rachel, seems to be courteous and prompt, letting us know each step of the way until our order arrives. The food arrived perfectly, and Rachel thanked us for the generous tip to let us know that it meant a lot. We were feeling good and getting the food ready and throwing on a movie to have a little at-home date night. We started putting food on our plates and heard a knock at the door. We both kind of looked at each other and then made our way towards the front door. My husband swung open the door, and what once was a smiling and bubbly delivery person was now at our door expressionless and white as a ghost. Rachel looks up at us and says softly, "Can I please come in? I think there's someone in my car." My husband, who always assumes the worst, is super protective and says no. He never ever lets strangers inside and has read and seen too many things where a good Samaritan lets someone in their house or helps them on the side of the road and you're just set up for some trap. He has said to me multiple times, as soon as you open the door for a stranger and let them in, it's already too late. After a minute or two of pleading with my husband, he agreed that this tiny girl wasn't a threat and we would let her in and lock the door right after. We motioned for Rachel to come in and we could tell that she was thankful but starting to get a little bit hysterical. We phoned the police and let them know what was going on and asked if they could send someone out. They let us know that they would send someone as soon as they could. And we sat with Rachel and tried to calm her down and let her know that she was safe now. We weren't going to let anyone in the house and the cops would check her car and the surrounding area. I'm sure of it. As we waited for the police, now in a mostly awkward silence, my husband noticed a few of our motion lights beginning to turn on. First, we saw one go off on the side of the house, followed by one going off in the backyard just a few moments later. Trying not to cause any panic, but definitely moving with some speed, my husband was darting around the house, making sure that all the windows and doors were locked. I knew they were because unless I specifically opened them, my husband always keeps everything closed and locked. And after he checked all of the locks, he starts to look through the blinds to see if there was anybody on the property illuminated by the motion lights. My husband thought that he saw something by the trees and bushes towards the northwest corner of our yard. He couldn't make it out, but said it looked like eyes were glowing from one of the openings. He told me to go back into the living room with Rachel and he would keep an eye on things. As I was sitting with Rachel, I heard what sounded like nails on a chalkboard, or the only other way to describe it is someone going down a water slide with no water, the kind of dry screeching sound that you might hear there. I went to tell my husband, but he was already hot on the trail, feeling like he had heard tapping on the windows in the dining room. My husband went to the windows where I thought that I'd heard the noise coming from and lunged back. He said that he saw a set of eyes pressed up against the glass. Thankfully, the next sound we heard and the image we saw were the flashing lights and sirens of police cars. The police arrive and search the inside and outside of our house thoroughly. They let us know no one is inside and also no one is inside Rachel's car, even though both of her back doors were completely wide open. Just as they were about to finish the search, they found someone lying underneath our back deck, trying to hide. The officers corral him back down to the ground and get cuffs on him to bring him back to the squad car. We then have to give additional statements and go through some information before they let Rachel know that they will have someone follow her home and escort her into her house. The main officer at the scene also let us know that he would leave someone outside patrolling for at least an hour and we could request it to be longer if we felt uncomfortable. We were all understandably shaken up by the ordeal and just wanted it to come to an end. My husband and I ended up eating a few bites of our dinner and went to bed shortly after. I don't think I got a minute of sleep that night, though. I felt like our privacy and safety were violated and also felt so bad for poor Rachel, who I'm sure also had a sleepless night. I'm glad everyone was okay, including the police officers, that nothing more violent or sinister happened that night. And it's safe to say, if we order out, we just go pick up the food now and haven't used a food delivery service app since.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Rebecca Lucille Schaefer was born in Eugene, Oregon on November 6, 1967. Her father, Dr. Benson Schaefer, was a child psychologist, while her mother was a writer and instructor at Portland Community College. Given how proud she was of her Jewish roots, young Rebecca would dream of becoming a rabbi. But after a chance encounter with a modeling agent, she began modeling clothes during her junior year in high school. Rebecca would become a popular subject of many photographers, and she made guest appearances, department store catalogs, and television commercials, as well as an extra in a straight-to-TV movie. She was so successful that in August of 1984, her parents gave her permission to move to New York City to pursue a full-time modeling career. At 5'7", she was considered too short for high-fashion modeling jobs and struggled to find work as a result. Rebecca even moved to Japan for a short stint in the hopes of finding work there, but found Japanese modeling standards were even stricter than back in the United States. Yet, within just a few months of moving back to New York, Rebecca landed her first TV role playing Amy Barnes in ABC's One Life to Live. The following year, she appeared on the cover of 17 magazine, which caught the attention of television producers who were casting for a sitcom called My Sister Sam. Through a series of grueling auditions, Rebecca won the role of Patricia Russell, and the series was initially a hit, but it was canceled halfway through its second season in 1988 due to failing ratings. The role established Rebecca's acting career and earned her several other roles in a variety of different productions. However, the role also brought her to the attention of an extremely dangerous and unstable young man, one that would have an indelible and catastrophic impact on her life. Robert John Bardo. The youngest of 7 children, Bardo was the son of a non-commissioned officer in the United States Air Force who had met his mother whilst deployed in Japan. Due to the nature of his father's occupation, the Bardo family moved frequently, eventually settling in Tucson, Arizona in 1983. And to say young Robert had a rough childhood would barely broach the issue. A young Robert was placed in foster care after abuse from one of his siblings got so bad that he threatened to take his own life. Couple that with the Bardo's family history of mental illness, and it's quite clear that he never really had a shot at emotionally stable adulthood. By the age of 15, Bardo had been institutionalized to treat severe emotional problems, and it was around then that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Shortly after, he dropped out of Pueblo Magnet High School and began working as a janitor at a Jack-in-the-Box restaurant. By the time he was 19, he had been arrested 3 times for disorderly conduct. Bardo's neighbors would frequently complain that he exhibited unexplainably strange and threatening behavior towards them. Yet, it seems they had no idea how deep Bardo's madness extended. You see, Bardo had a dangerously obsessive personality and found himself increasingly obsessed with certain female celebrities. The first target of his dangerous obsession was with the 13-year-old Samantha Smith, an American schoolgirl, peace activist, and child actress from Manchester, Maine, who became famous during the Cold War after her death on August 25, 1985, Bar Harbor Airlines Flight 1808 plane crash. Bardo was devastated, but it was during a period of intense mourning that he discovered Rebecca Schaefer while watching My Sister Sam. After writing Rebecca numerous letters confessing his love for her, Bardo attempted to gain access to the set of My Sister Sam, who was turned away by security. It was then that Bardo turned to a terrifyingly creative method of discovering Rebecca's whereabouts. Bardo contacted a Los Angeles-based private detective agency, promising to pay them handsomely if they could obtain the address of one Rebecca Schaefer. Using the California Department of Motor Vehicles records, the private detectives successfully obtained Rebecca's address, passing it along to Bardo for a tidy sum. They had no idea how unhinged Bardo was, or what the ramifications of their actions were. They were soon to find out just how irresponsible they had truly been. On July 18th, 1989, Bardo drove to Los Angeles to confront Rebecca at her home. He was angry because she hadn't bothered to reply to any of his letters, but not only that, he was furious because she appeared in a raunchy love scene in the movie scene from The Class Struggle and Beverly Hills. Bardo allegedly told Rebecca that she'd lost her innocence, and then in partaking in such an impure movie scene, had become just another Hollywood harlot. He entered this bizarre tirade by assuring her that he was a big fan. Now all he wanted was the best for her. Rebecca was terrified and told Bardo she wanted nothing to do with him, slamming the door in his face and rushing to call the police. They assured Rebecca they'd come over to her as soon as they could. But the situation wasn't an emergency at the moment, and no lights or sirens were rushing to her apartment. In the meantime, a heartbroken Bardo walked over to a nearby diner to get some breakfast. His plan to win over Rebecca had failed, but he also had a plan B, which he would use in the event of Rebecca's rejection. About an hour later, Rebecca's apartment doorbell rang again. Assuming it was the cops, she rushed over to answer the door, but when she stopped to open it, the only person she saw standing before her was Robert Bardo. Bardo raised a Ruger 357 handgun and shot Rebecca through the heart. He then tossed a copy of Catcher in the Rye into her apartment and was later arrested in Tucson while wandering through traffic. The following year, Bardo tried to argue that he was criminally insane, but a judge dismissed the idea and labeled him a dangerously obsessive but otherwise mentally competent person. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and is currently serving his sentence at California's Avenue State Prison. As a consequence of Bardo's actions and his methods of obtaining Schaefer's address, the U.S. Congress passed the Driver Privacy Protection Act, which prohibits the State Department of Motor Vehicles from disclosing the home addresses of state residents. Rebecca's murder also prompted the first anti-stalking state laws, including the California Penal Code 6469, which was essentially the nation's first law against obsessive or fixated persons. It was a nice gesture, but few deny that they came too little, too late for Rebecca, who needed protection from a dangerous and violent stalker long before there were any legal means to combat them. We can only hope these laws are direct and robust enough to stop the same thing from happening again. But given the determination of the human spirit, that seems like wishful thinking indeed.
I'm a DJ here in South Korea, and because English is not my first language, please excuse me if there are any mistakes here. 20 years ago, I was driving home from a late-night wedding gig. It was around 4:30 a.m., and I was driving south on our equivalent of an interstate highway, when at one point, the retaining walls on each side of the highway grew very narrow due to the road snaking through mountain passes and other tunnel-like places. It's not like a particularly dangerous place to drive, but the blind bends definitely made me a little nervous as I slowed down to traverse them. Good job I did too, because suddenly, out of nowhere, a young woman jumped out in front of my car, and I was forced to slam on the brakes hard. I swear I almost gave myself whiplash, but I managed to stop in time, and I was so angry that I got out of my car to shout at her what was she even thinking that she was doing. She looked up at me, didn't say a word in reply, then actually ran to the passenger side door and climbed into my car. It was then that I realized that she was evidently running from someone or something. So I freaked out for a second and as many minutes, then jumped back into my car and drove off. I kept asking her, "Are you okay? Who's chasing you?" But she only ever replied with, "I'm sorry, I just need to call my mom. I just need to call my mom." She looked to be in her late teens, with dyed blonde hair and dirty clothes that made it look like she tripped a few times while escaping an attacker. I told her it was okay, that I'd drive her somewhere so she could call her parents, but I couldn't get a straight answer out of her because she was panicking and crying. We'd both seen the figure in my rearview mirror as we drove away. It caused her to scream out, which made me speed up. I thought she might calm down a little so she could tell me what was going on, but she was terrified and just kept saying I need to call Mom whenever she calmed down enough to talk. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't she just use a cell phone? Well, this was a time when not everyone in South Korea could afford cell phones. They were in the market, sure, but to buy even a terrible one would require at least middle-class salaries, so I had to wait until I saw a 24-hour gas station to find anywhere the girl could use the phone. I asked her if she needed any change to use the payphones, but she just looked up at me and said the same thing. I just need to call Mom. I think that's when I realized that something wasn't right. It was literally the only thing she said to me for the entire ride, and when we stopped, she just got out and ran into the grocery store. It was very evident that she was terrified of whoever had been following her, and it was also evident that they were too scared to talk about it, so, trying to be a good citizen, I called the police and told them everything. I kept the car running and kept watching the girl as she used the payphone. The police dispatcher told me it would be around 10 minutes before the police arrived, and I was worried she'd freak out if she found out I'd called them. So, that was what was occupying my mind as I watched the girl put the phone down before she appeared to start walking back towards my car. Suddenly, she stopped, and she turned back towards the gas station as if she'd heard something around the corner of it, which was completely dark and not covered by any lights. I watched as she walked closer and closer towards it, almost like someone was calling her name into the darkness. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a man leap out of the darkness, grab her, then drag her back into it. I immediately put my foot down, zooming around to where she'd been grabbed so I can illuminate the darkness with my headlights. It was a matter of seconds, and I thought I'd see some predator trying to drag her behind a dumpster or something, but there was no one there. No one there at all. It actually took my breath away for a moment. There didn't seem to be anywhere for two people to disappear, just a chain link fence and the rear of the gas station. So where had they gone? Before I got a chance to look any further, the police showed up, so I ran over to their car and frantically told them what I'd just seen. We searched the area completely. They even checked in the back room of the gas station, but there was no one fitting the description of the girl or the attacker. The police thanked me for filing the report, but told me that there was no longer any reason for me to be there. It was about 5:30 in the morning by that time, and adrenaline was starting to wear off, so I did as I was told and went home to sleep. Naturally, it wasn't the most peaceful sleep of my life, and my first thoughts when I awoke were that that poor girl had been dragged into the shadows. And I never learned of her fate. Nothing was in the news about it, and when I contacted the police about it, they just told me it was under investigation. But the thing that I find really scary about the whole thing is how there was a man chasing her when she got into my car on the highway, and we must have driven at least 5 or 6 miles away from the scene. It couldn't have been the same guy who grabbed her, and there's no way of anyone knowing where we were headed. So how was someone able to find her at the gas station? Was it something to do with the phone call she made? I have so many unanswered questions about this event in my life, and sometimes I feel like it haunts me. I find myself scared of total strangers whose names I didn't even know, and as much as I hope she's okay, somewhere, and what happened was part of some horrible but brief chapter in her life, I have the worst feeling that she's not okay at all.
I was a bad kid. And now I'm not talking about your regular teenage delinquency, like trying cigarettes, school detention, or getting bad grades. I mean really bad. The age 17, I was shoplifting, stealing cars, getting picked up by cops for all sorts of things. not exactly hurting anyone, but I was a constant headache for my mom and dad. Then after me and dad almost got into an actual fist fight, he kicked me out of the house. I knew I deserved it, and I knew they figured I'd just go stay with friends for a couple of days, because that's exactly what I did. But me being me, I quickly wore out my welcome in my buddies' houses and ran out of places to stay. But again, me being me, I was way too proud to just go home and apologize. Since it was summertime, I figured it'd be a good idea to head down to the park to find somewhere to sleep. Now I lived in the inner city back then, so there was a bunch of other actual homeless people already sleeping there. And as soon as I realized I was actually stuck out there for a night, I started to realize that this homeless thing wasn't a game anymore. As it started to get really late, I got to the park at around 11 p.m., and it was like 1 a.m. by the time this happened. One of the homeless dudes walked up to me as I started to bed down on the bench and started talking to me. He asked what I was doing, and being naive, I told him homelessness, immediately responding by saying, "No, you're not," and pretty much guessed the whole deal about me having a falling out with my mom and dad. I didn't want to admit that he was exactly right, so I just kept my mouth shut. But I remember him saying something like, "Really though, kid, if you have Ken, you need to pay him a visit because I promise you ain't ready for this life." My pride kept me out there for 3 whole nights, and every single time I caught up on that bench, the same old homeless dude would walk up and be like, "Go home, the sing you." In hindsight, he was exactly right. But at the time, he was just another person to prove wrong. My final night on the street, I also happened to be the first that I tried to integrate myself with the homeless folk who slept in the park, partially out of boredom and partially out of hunger. I'd run out of money, run out of food, and I figured if I hung out with the other guys, I could maybe get in on some of their food or something. I asked around, but no one had any spares until I asked this one guy, and he told me to buzz off, and I noticed a Snickers bar sticking out of his coat pocket. My rumbling stomach basically just overrode my brain, and with all the dexterity of a Victorian pickpocket, I slid the thing out of his pocket and walked off. Now my proudest moment stealing food from a homeless guy, when I could have just swallowed my pride and walk home, but it is what it is. So I go off to hide somewhere so I can devour the Snickers hold, and I walk back to where the other guys are to hang out some more. Maybe like 2 or 3 hours later, I'm still trying to integrate myself with the homeless guys, but I'm also still pretty nervous about them for obvious reasons. I figured the guy I stole from is too drunk to even notice that I stole from him. But oh boy, was I wrong about that. Because like I said, a few hours after I stole it, I noticed the guy began to tap his coat pocket, obviously noticing that the candy bar is gone. I'm trying to remain inconspicuous, but I'm also trying to keep my eye on the guy, because if he put 2 and 2 together and worked out that it was me that stole from him, I wanted enough warning to be able to get out of there. So the guy taps his pocket when he stops. I can see the cogs turning in his booze-soaked brain, as I figured he was thinking pretty sure I had some candy in there. But then a few seconds later, he's back taking pulls from his 40 Ankillery, had completely forgotten about the whole thing. Only he hadn't. And the most shocking thing about what came next was how he went from 0 to 100 in like a second flat. So remember that pool of his 40. He takes 1, then 2, then a third much larger one, almost like he was trying to polish the whole thing off in a hurry. Which, as it turned out, was exactly what he was doing, because what was once an innocent beverage receptacle soon became a weapon. When he turned to the guy to his right and sent the glass 40 bottles smashing into his face, the guy just collapsed, hands covering his face. Some hands with muffled blood, curdling screams that he let out, and the guy I stole from then started kicking the lie. if I let him steal from me, mother effer. And then, of all the homeless people there, only one actually tried to break it up. And even then, it was just a slurred by breaking up over there, which ended up being totally ignored. I remember turning to the older dude had been nice to me, telling me to go home and whatnot, and I feigned ignorance. As I asked him what was going on, the guy said the dude getting beat down was always stealing stuff, so if anything went missing around the park, it was most probably his fault. No one cared though. No one gave single worry that this guy was getting his face stomped on, and it was all my fault. Oh, and I mean stomped on. I could hear this guy's face literally crunching under this guy's boot. I knew I should have said something. I know I should have owned up. But believe me when I tell you that I've never been that scared. Not before or after. All I could think of was, if I tell the truth, that'd be my face getting stomped on, only he'll probably be like 100 times worse because, well, look what I cost. I turned to the nice guy and was like, what if he didn't steal it? What if someone else stole it? And the guy looked at me and his eyes went all wide and he leaned in and said, don't say a word, kid. Just leave. Leave and never ever come back. As I walked away, I could still hear the guy getting his buck beaten, although I never found out what happened to him. I don't see anyone being able to survive the kind of head injuries he got. A very same night, maybe at around 2 a.m., I walked back to my parents' house and banged on the front door until my dad woke up and answered. I just blurted out this big long apology about being a total idiot to not appreciate what I'd had. I'm pleased to say that now is the first step on the road of being a decent human being, because almost everything I did before that had little to no consequences, or rather, will little there were and bother me. But that night I sold the candy bar, I actually saw how bad the repercussions could be, and honestly, I had no idea that could ever be that bad, just for taking a candy bar. I feel equal parts shame and horror when I look back on it. My pride and greed caused me to do something shameful, and my cowardice might have cost him relatively innocent man's life. I wish it had never happened, but at the same time, if it didn't, who knows? I might be still hanging out in that park today, if I'd even been alive at all.